Welcome once again, everybody. My name's Neil Malik, and this is Designing for an Audience. It's around Microsoft PowerPoint, but I guess you could consider it to be around Apple's Keynote product and really any presentation that you give, whether or not there are PowerPoint slides behind it. For those of you I have not met before, that's my smiling face. My name's Neil, and I am a Microsoft certified trainer. You can get in touch with me, neil@nactraining.com, after today's session is over. If there's a detail about something that is unclear to you or doesn't work well for you, or if there's a resource that I mentioned during today's session that you have a hard time finding. So again, my email address is neil@nactraining.com. And in about 15 seconds, I'm going to go away from the screen and you guys won't see my face anymore. All right, I'll let you get that copied down. Beautiful. Before we move forward, I'd just like to reference two areas where you can ask me questions. Up at the top of the screen, you'll notice there is a microphone icon, and yours probably has a slash through it. That microphone icon demonstrates whether or not your audio is going through the microphone and going to me, or going through the phone and going to me. If you'd like to ask me a question verbally, please feel free to unmute your line and ask the question. Additionally, in the bottom left-hand corner, you have a chat box. You can click into that field and send me a chat message if there's a question that you'd like to ask. After today's session is over, you can find a recording of it at youtube.com/neilmalik. And what's more, later today, after I post this online, I'm going to email the entirety of the registered users and tell them where this link can be found. So again, youtube.com/neilmalik is where you'll be able to find this recorded session and previous ones, and also where you can find how-tos on things like Microsoft Excel and Outlook. Now, in preparing for this session, I actually sent out a survey to a lot of people who read my newsletter at the end of last year, and I was told by many people that one of the most important things to them was being able to create a great presentation. And so what I decided to do was to build a set of courses, a set of 30-minute sessions around how to create excellent presentations. The first 3 sessions, being able to understand and design for your audience, being able to build a theme and a structure for the presentation, and being able to use visual thinking in developing your presentation, are all ideas around being able to plan out the message that you want to deliver to people. This all happens before you even open up Microsoft PowerPoint. It's about being able to be prepared for PowerPoint, but not going into PowerPoint and beginning to work just yet. When you design a successful message, then people who are out there trying to understand what it is you're trying to deliver are going to have a much easier time of things. Now we move past the pre-PowerPoint section into 3 areas that I would call visual design. So there will be 3 sessions around diagrams, slide design, and designing motion in a presentation. And those are, of course, ways of translating the information that you have in your visual thinking and your theme building into things that people actually see during your presentation. And finally, whereas the right half of this screen is all really about what ends up going onto the slide, ultimately it's going to be you, or maybe somebody who works with you, standing in front of the room and delivering this presentation. And if you're not a very effective presenter, even a great PowerPoint slide deck is really not going to save things. So the last 3 sessions in our sequence are going to be about being able to deliver that presentation as successfully as possible. So this is our first session about understanding your audience and designing your presentation with your audience in mind. Now, I did just flip past a slide very quickly there. Let me backtrack for just a second. And before we get off the ground here today, if you'd like today's handout that surrounds how to analyze your audience, the sorts of questions that you need to answer about your audience, please go to nactraining.com/handouts.aspx. Again, because this presentation will be up on YouTube after today's session, and at the end of today's session I'll also show you the same link, You can follow up and use this handout even if you don't do it during the midst of my presentation here. But again, nactraining.com/handouts.aspx is the address where you can go to find this right here. So this is nactraining.com/handouts.aspx. And as you can see here, there's a link for designing for an audience. This is a PDF file that you can use over and over and over again when trying to determine who your audience is and what's important to them. And you can also print this out and share it. You can use this as many times as you like. And we'll be referring back to this throughout the course of today's session. nactraining.com/handouts.aspx. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about what we do to analyze our audience and really why we analyze our audience in the first place. So what I'd like to do here is discuss what an audience is to a presentation. Every single thing about the presentation you're about to design is for the audience. It is for the audience's consumption, it is for the audience's understanding, and ultimately it's for the audience to be motivated, to be inspired to do something. If you're standing in front of a room and delivering a presentation, and what you've thought about is how you can best deliver your information, what you need to deliver, and what you need in order to be successful in the room, you've never once turned around and really thought about the other people who are in the room with you, who are really the only thing that matters throughout this presentation. Understanding your audience, understanding what it is that will inspire them, what it is that will help them learn the information you need them to learn, understanding what it is that they need to be able to take away from this presentation is really all that matters. So going back to this diagram right here, the absolute key to everything is this very first part of the diagnosis. Being able to understand your audience and deliver what they need. Let me give you two simple examples here from real life. We all know Steve Jobs, and we all know Steve Jobs' presentations of things like iPhones and iPads and things like that. And you know that he is very well regarded as a great presenter, an excellent presenter, the sort of guy that people write books about, of course. But ultimately, when he presented these iPhone, iPad, iMac, every sort of introduction to every product that he ever delivered, what he was doing and every step in the process was not focusing on himself, on how he could remember his lines, not focusing on how he could present himself in the best possible light, but all he was thinking about the entire time was how to get the people to go to the Apple Store. If you can't drive people to the Apple Store, then all that stuff you do up on stage, it means nothing. So how is it that you drive people to the Apple Store? Well, you focus on the audience, you focus on what they need, and what's going to get them to do what you want them to do. In this case, there's some very simple sales advice that he consistently delivered on, and the sort of thing that actually Microsoft doesn't deliver on very well. And this is sort of what separates a really interesting company, a company that people are really inspired by, and a company that people buy their products because that's what they've got to do. And the sales advice is sell the benefits, not the features. And if you think about this in terms of what we've been talking about up until now, we've been talking about the audience, we've been talking about what the audience needs, we've been talking about what inspires the audience, as opposed to what a lot of people do when they present and they focus on themselves. Here's what I mean by that. If I were to deliver a product to you and I were to try to sell you on that product, a lot of times I might say things like, well, this product has a really fast processor, or this product has a lot of different applications on it, or this product, it boots up very quickly. Every single one of those things is a feature of the product. Every single one of those things focuses on what I have done for you, and it aggrandizes the product. What's important here is not the product at all. What's important is the person that you're trying to sell to. For that person, it's important that they be able to get home quickly because they have great navigation. It's important to them that they be able to use that phone late at night and that their battery life doesn't die. So we focus on the benefits of because of a long battery life, this phone will be alive at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're driving home. Because of the great GPS unit, you're going to be able to find your way back from remote locations. We focus on the benefits and not the features, in the same way that so far I've been telling you that in presentations, focusing on the people in the audience is vastly superior to focusing on your own concerns and your own needs. Again, another example of this is a lot of times when people put together presentations, they'll put together presentations where a lot of words are on the screen, and then they'll read those words to you. In many situations, the reason that they do that is because there is a comfort level to know that even if you miss your place in the presentation, you'll always be able to look up at the slide and remember what it was you were trying to say. But that's focusing on your needs during the midst of the presentation instead of focusing on the audience. And of course, everybody here knows that if they sit there and read the slide to you, you're going to be, well, you're going to be completely exhausted by it. You're going to be put to sleep by it. That's probably a good way of saying it. So again, we focus on what the audience needs and not what we need. Let me give you another example of this. So Walt Disney, of course, great inspirational figure, amazing businessman, and everything else. At this point in time, if you go to a description of the Walt Disney Company online, you're going to see a description that says, yeah, the Walt Disney Company owns ABC and ESPN, and they own all these theme parks, and they make all these movies, they own Pixar, and there's a lot of really interesting business stuff that goes into the Walt Disney Corporation. But ultimately, the key to every single thing that's ever happened to them as a business was their focus not on the business side of things, not on aggrandizing the Disney Corporation, but rather on the really beautiful side of things that kids and families connect to. The Walt Disney Corporation grew to the size that it is today on the back of the movies that they're able to deliver to you, the theme park experiences. And again, this is focusing on what can we do for these people? What can we do to make their lives as interesting, as flavorful as possible? And everything else takes care of itself from there. So what we need to do is we need to find ways of understanding our audience member. Let's say this is our audience member and her name is Sheila, and trying to find ways of connecting with her that are going to get her to do things that are ultimately what we want. And so one of the simplest ways of analyzing this is, is Sheila more of a iPhone person, or is she more of a Snow White person, right? If we go to Sheila and she's more concerned with her family members, if she's more concerned about her kids, her husband, if she's more concerned about her mom and dad, well, that's something that we need to be able to connect with. If she's the sort of person who's more connected to the profit margins of the business or something interesting that her phone does, we need to understand that as well. And so through the rest of this session, what I'm going to be doing is going back to that handout that I described just a second ago, finding ways of isolating this information, and ultimately of turning this into something that's productive for our presentations. Does anybody have any questions for me? Any commentary to this point? Lovely. So how do we do this? Well, let me first start off by analyzing what it is a presentation needs to do and what can get in the way of that. So if we're talking to a group of people, of course we want our message to be delivered to that group of people, and ultimately we want every single person in that room to have that aha moment where they understand what we're talking about, where they see our perspective on things, and where they go along with whatever the presentation is about. So if we're delivering them information about stock prices, or we're delivering them information about something that the technical support group needs to do, we need them to get the full flavor of the message. We need them to fully understand what we're trying to deliver to them. And ultimately, here's the most important part. We need them to have that switch flipped so that they understand what they're supposed to do afterwards. But of course, most people, when we present to them, there is a wall between us and them. And that wall is composed of 1,000 different things that keep the message from being transmitted successfully. Now, I'm going to talk about this more in future sessions, but there's a very simple idea here from the world of radio. It's called signal and noise. So when we're talking to somebody, when we're presenting some piece of information to them, we're trying to send them as much of the signal as possible, as much as the radio signal as possible, as much of the TV signal as possible, whatever it is. And everything that gets in the way, all the static, all the disconnect that happens, that's all the noise that impedes our ability of being able to hear and understand that message, whether it's on the radio or TV, whether it's in a presentation. We want to, as much as possible, ramp up the amount of signal that we're trying to push across. And today's session is a lot about being able to minimize the amount of noise that's getting in the way. So if we look at these, say for instance, right now in today's session, if I talked about mood, distractions, language issues, previous biases, audio problems, and lack of interest, what are the things that I could manage and what are the things I couldn't manage? Well, I can't be there with you, so I can't keep the dog from running into the room, so I can't keep you from having distractions. And because this is a 30-minute session, I have limited ability to sort of deal with any audio problems or language issues that may come up. But if you're coming into this bored, or if you're coming into this with a mood that says, well, this is going to be a waste of my time, hopefully something that I can do in today's session will link you up to this message and pull you along. If you have previous biases about this information, if you have something that you think you know about this information that keeps you from understanding it very clearly when I say something, then I need to be able to get around those biases. I need to understand what those biases are. I need to understand why you have a lack of interest in this particular topic. And I need to understand why your mood is whatever it is. And try to find ways of connecting with you even though there is this wall between us. So what sorts of things can we do to help understand this wall and hopefully get around it? Well, we're going to profile. Now, this is a kind of a touchy subject because, of course, whenever you talk about profiling somebody, you're talking about making generalities about how they're going to understand something, about how they're going to react to something. And so we want to make sure that we never cross that line into stereotypes and cliches, but we want to make sure that we understand that we need to truly see where somebody else is coming from. And the only real way to do that is to draw for ourselves a profile of that person so that we can, as much as possible, be on the same page with them. Now, if you guys are in the handout that I was describing earlier, the interesting thing is that page number 1 of the handout, the number one thing that you need to do in profiling before you do anything else is you actually need to profile yourself. All right, so this is me. And going back to the handout, how is it and why is it that I'm going to profile myself? Well, the situation here is if you are presenting information to people, you probably know at least some of those people who are coming in the door. And even if you don't know them personally, you know the types of people who are coming in the door for this presentation. And you have certain biases, you have certain reactions to the people who are coming in. And those biases are going to affect how I deliver my message and what my message even is in the first place. A lot of times when I was first starting out presenting, I'd look around the room and I'd see somebody with kind of a scowl on their face. And that would sort of put me ill at ease. I'd say, wow, okay, so this person really doesn't want to be here. I wonder why they even bothered, you know? I'd say to myself, oh, I guess I'll talk to everybody else and I'll just avoid eye contact with the person who has the scowl on their face. But if I understand that about myself, if I understand that immediate reaction I have to the person who has the scowl on their face, I can start to actively counteract that. I need to understand that, some people, for example, their faces just look like they're scowling anytime, anyway, all the time. And if you don't understand that, you could very easily avoid eye contact with somebody who is really the best person in the audience to talk to. And of course, there's that thing where we always put ourselves in each other's shoes. We try to make sure that we understand that some people are just having a bad day. So if you know that one of your bosses is coming in the door and you're scared of that person, you need to make sure that you understand that about yourself. You need to make sure that you start to address that. Because if you talk to everybody else except for that boss that you're scared of, well, it's going to negatively impact the way your presentation comes across. So that's our first idea. Do I have any biases that are going to impact how I deal with somebody? I also need to make sure I don't have any positive biases. A lot of times you'll have a presentation and two or three people in the room will be your buddies, and you'll start to joke with them and everybody else will be left out of the joke. You need to make sure that you understand that and sort of put yourself on a nice even keel when you're doing your presenting. The second thing that always happens, and I was talking about this a little while ago, is presentations become about you, right? If a presentation is about you, then the people in the room are going to get bored. And the biggest reason for the presentation being about you is because you have nerves about it, right? You're thinking to yourself, I don't present a whole lot. I don't talk in front of people a whole lot. I should probably try to make myself as comfortable as possible. And I should probably try to get in and out without taking a lot of questions. If that ever happens, if you try to do a presentation without taking questions, all of a sudden everybody's just along for the ride and they just don't care anymore. So the presentation's always got to be about them. You got to say to yourself, okay, what is it I'm trying to present, and why is it important to them? And how can I deliver that information to them? And the more you focus on them, I find the less that you have your own nerves, actually. Because if you focus on the fact that they are the most important people in the room, then you're just a conduit for information. It becomes a lot less important for you to feel comfortable. And lastly, and there's a great book about this one called Made to Stick, there's something called the curse of knowledge. And I just want to describe this very quickly for you. The curse of knowledge is that you know things that the people in the room don't know, right? So for example, right now, I'm delivering a presentation about profiling an audience. And I'm assuming that everybody in this particular presentation knows what the audience is. I'm assuming that everybody in my audience knows what PowerPoint is. I'm assuming that they know that we are going to plan a presentation before we build the presentation. So if you're ever delivering a piece of information and there is absolutely knowledge behind that, you need to analyze that and ask yourself, am I one of the only people who really understands this? Because a lot of times we'll talk over people's heads without realizing it. And I know we don't want to condescend towards our audiences, but talking over their heads is also really rather distracting and really rather counterproductive. So we need to try to avoid the curse of knowledge as much as possible. And the only way to do that is to analyze ourselves as we move along. How's everybody feeling so far? Does anybody have any questions for me? Again, the chat box down in the bottom left and the microphone icon would allow you to do that. Lovely. Now, again, this whole thing was about being able to analyze your audience and design a presentation for your audience. So let's move past you, right? Now we've spent enough time thinking about you. Let's think about who the people in the room are. Now, the first problem that you're going to have is that sometimes you're going to know the person who's in the room, and sometimes they're going to be sort of an abstract figure until they arrive. So for the time being, we're going to assume that we don't know who this person is. So we're going to go with the silhouette on the right instead of one of our coworkers on the left who we really know very well. The first problem is, of course, if you don't know somebody, if you have just a silhouette of somebody and you don't have a practical understanding of who they are, what they need, and those sorts of things, we need to start off with just who are they and where are they coming from. So we can look into who this person is and what sorts of job they're in, things like that. And it's in your best interest to go out there online and figure out what it is that that person reads. So, for example, if they're a CFO, you need to figure out where the magazines and articles are that CFOs read and read up on that a little bit. Read up on what their inside jokes are like. Read up on what they concern themselves with day in, day out. A lot of times you'll go to a website for a CIO, CTO, CEO, for a financial advisor, what have you, and you'll realize that the people there are all talking about the same thing. They all have the same issue. And you can very easily isolate then what's most important out of your information to deliver that for that person. Now, of course, being able to understand where they're coming from a reading perspective is only a shadow of who they are. So it's really nice to be able to have a conversation with them. If you can carry on a conversation with them either via email or the phone or something, that's very helpful. If you can't do that, this is something that I did personally again in my own business. I went to all my newsletter readers and I just sent out a simple survey. For those of you guys who don't know, surveymonkey.com does free surveys. So you go to surveymonkey.com, you sign up for a free account, and then you can forward little multiple choice questions and ranking questions to the people who are going to be in your audience. And even if you only get, half or a third of your audience to respond, at least you've got a little bit of information there where you can ask things like, what is most important to you to come away with in this presentation? So even if you cannot have a direct conversation with this person, maybe you can get a little bit of a cross-section of the people who are going to be in the room. And then again, this is where we want to stop short of doing stereotypes, but we can use demographics to a certain extent to understand this person, to understand their age, gender, income, what part of the country they're from, whether they have kids or not, what their line of work is. And all of this is going to help us understand where this person is coming from, not stereotyping them. Again, this is not to stereotype them, this is not to build off of cliches, but this is to help you to understand who this person is and what their perspectives on the world might be. What sorts of things they're listening to on a regular basis, what sorts of things they're concerned with on a regular basis. So hopefully through those steps, you can find a way of bringing a little bit more color to that person, of understanding who they are and the sorts of things that matter to them. And then you can start to ask these questions. And again, going back to the handout we were talking about earlier, here's your audience's perspective on page number 2 and how they're going to change things on page number 3. So let's figure out how this is going to work. We look to our coworker, we look to our boss, we look to the nameless, faceless people who are going to be in the room, whatever they are. And you start to ask these questions of them. What is their day like? What's their schedule like? How busy are they? What are they not doing so that they can be in the room today? If you start thinking about that, somebody like the CEO might really, really positively respond to a 15-minute meeting, right? Because the CEO has 27 other things that they need to be doing at that moment. If you can deliver them the information they need in the shortest possible time, that might be really helpful. There's no need to always do an hour-long meeting if you want to respect their time better. Or if you want to respect their time, you may need to extend the meeting out to an hour and a half or 2 hours because there's only one way to deliver all the information, and that's by talking for 2 hours. It's important to understand what their schedule is and what demands are on them day in, day out, what pressures they're under, and that'll help you to build your message. What's important to them? What is the most important thing to them day in, day out? What sorts of things drive their decision-making process? And where do they get their information from? If they get their information from CFO Magazine, and you can quote statistics that are in CFO Magazine, of course you're going to be farther ahead in that situation. And what do they already know? What biases do they have? So we were talking about our biases a second ago. Now what biases do they have? If you know that they're biased against something or for something, you need to use that information. And kind of an interesting one here, what sets off their bullshit meter, right? So if they are listening to you and you say something that they know is just one of those catchphrases and doesn't really mean anything, that might set them off. That might shut them down for the rest of the presentation. You need to understand what it is that's going to resonate with them and the sorts of things that are going to conflict with them and shut them down. So let's imagine that I did this right before my presentation to you guys. Right now, I'm going to profile you guys as being busy. You guys work probably 8 hours or more every day. And right now, you're on your lunch break, right? If you're on your lunch break, that means that you're taking a snippet of time between being demanded on by several different people. And I need to be as efficient as possible to deliver the information effectively, but also quickly. The most important thing for you is being able to get this thing done quickly and get it done without sacrificing your ability to do the job, right? So if you are being told that you should be doing something, but that's going to take way too much time and energy to accomplish, you're probably going to turn that down. You're going to say, I'm going to continue doing my job the way I was doing it because it doesn't involve these extra 5 steps. And potentially, you know that the presentations are bad anyway, but you only have limited control over the presentation's output. So what are we going to do with that information? Some other questions that you need to ask. Are they the actual person making the decision, or are they just somebody who's going to push somebody else? And if they can do something about this, how are we going to convince them that they need to get it done? If we can convince them that it needs to be done, what piece of information is going to help them do their job? So let's say that you're talking to your manager and they need to turn around and talk to their manager. One of the more important things that you can do is give them enough information to be able to convince their manager that this thing needs to get done. You don't need necessarily just the information to convince your manager, but you need the information to convince their manager further up the line. These are the sorts of things that asking the question shines a light on. And finally, what sorts of things, and this helps a lot if you know the person directly, what sorts of things drive them? There are people, and you guys all know people like this, there are people for whom the most important thing is to know that their job is secure and to know that they're going to be able to do their job tomorrow and they're not going to lose it to somebody else. And all they want to make sure of is that they're guaranteed that that's locked in. And there are other people, they take over a department, for example, and they realize, you know what? I need to improve this department. There are things about this department that are run down, and I need to bring this department up and polish them off. Do they respond to you having little bits of sarcasm here or there, or are they just show me 15 minutes worth of the results and we'll be done? Again, here, if I were to talk about my hypothetical audience, I might say, okay, these people are definitely influencers. Every once in a while, they're left to their own devices, but ultimately, they need to be able to push on the real decision makers. They need to be able to get their job done. They need to be sure that whatever they're learning about is going to directly impact what their end result is. And a lot of times you'll be able to do the job, but you need to make sure that it's always successful. You can't waste time hoping that something will work if it breaks down. And I need to make sure that the materials they walk away with can help them do their job instantly. So let's run through that same handout, but do it with a hypothetical manager. Right? So if this hypothetical manager just took over her department, but she's been in the department for a long time and always felt like the managers of this department were doing a disservice to her coworkers, she's probably going to look for big things to change about the department to really shine a light on this department and how good it can be for the rest of the company. So if we think about presenting her a piece of information, Maybe she's looking forward to us talking to her, bringing her ideas. If she's looking forward to it, it's a good idea to have some fun with it. It's a good idea to tell a couple of jokes and keep it light, keep it interesting, but of course, deliver some real information for her. If she knows that there's big things that need to be done, then go ahead and aim big. Don't tell her how we can save a 0.5% every year if we just reuse our paper clips or something like that. Make sure you've got a big idea and deliver. And if she wants to be convinced of this information, and this is a huge one, sometimes you, again, don't need to overtalk the situation. If it's a CEO and the CEO just wants to know in 15 minutes whether he should do something or not, don't overtalk it. If your manager is ready to be convinced of a piece of information, you don't need to give her the same information 17 different ways. If she has the authority to make this decision, then give her the necessary pieces to make that decision, to say, yes, it's worth it. But if she has to turn around and answer to somebody else, you need to be able to say, okay, I understand your life. I understand your day-to-day schedule. I understand what your requirements in this are. So I'm going to show you immediate impact, and I'm going to give you this weekly update that's going to give you the ability to turn around and talk to your bosses. Because as much as I need to talk to you as a boss, I know that you have your own bosses, and I respect that. And finally, if she's looking forward to making a department, then go ahead and show her exactly how the improvements are going to work. So we've taken 10 seconds here. We've figured out something about a particular manager. We've isolated what would work for her, and we've been able to deliver on that. Now, last thing before we sign off for today, what happens if you've got a diverse room? Of course, this is going to happen all the time. You're going to have the CEO, the CFO, 2 managers, and a bunch of your coworkers all in the same room at the same time, and they don't all have the same requirements. So, of course, what you need to do, number one, is you need to prioritize. You need to say, okay, in this room, the CEO is just there for show. It's the CFO who's the person I really need to make a convincing argument to. And then ultimately, probably the CEO needs to see that I'm doing a good job with this. I need to prioritize. And you also need to segment it up. You don't want to throw all your information into one long run-on presentation, but find little chunks and show people how those chunks relate to one another. So for example, if I was talking to the CFO, in chunk number 1, we propose the solution. Because it's the CFO, he's concerned with the cost to the business and the immediate returns. So I show him the chunk of my presentation that is directly related to him. And then finally, I'm talking to my coworkers. And so in my coworkers chunk, I'm going to tell them how this is going to get implemented. I very clearly set out the navigational structure and show people how these are related to one another. And finally, what are those immediate tools I told you I was going to deliver to you? So first of all, you guys all have this handout. The handout is available to you at nactraining.com/handouts.aspx. Again, if you have my email address from the beginning of the session, you can feel free to email me for this handout as well. I'd be happy to forward that along to you. You can then use that along with the video, which is on YouTube immediately after this session, to direct yourself through this with your managers in mind, with your audience members in mind, with your CEO in mind, whomever. Now, secondly, you need to be able to throw out a wide net. And so SurveyMonkey, which we talked about earlier in the session, is a very valuable resource to be able to submit surveys to a wide group of people and get a subsection of those people's information. So go to surveymonkey.com, sign up for a free account. It's a beautiful service. And finally, if you want some reading on this topic and many of the related topics, a book that I used very strongly to build this material is a book by Nancy Duarte called Resonate. It's a beautiful square blue book about presentations. It's about architecting a structure for your presentation, understanding your audience, and being able to, as the book says, resonate with them. Now, after today's session, I'm going to stay on the line to answer any additional questions there may be. But please do take this information, take the YouTube channel, take the email address and the handouts, and try to use this today on the people that you're going to talk to most frequently. If you have a pre-made a sketch of your bosses. It'll be a great thing to be able to pull out later, to be able to direct a presentation to them with minimal effort involved. Thanks, everybody. The next session is the one on the 3rd of February for building themes and structures. And if you go to knactraining.com, you'll see the event schedule there, and you can register for that. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and be outstanding at what you do.